Outside and inner stories. The starting point for being able to change the blocks in your life is to be able to clear the bullshit from your past so that you can live from your authentic self here and now. But to do that, you need to understand the stories that are standing in your way. Those stories are the bullshit that's blocking you from living from your authentic self. In order to change your stories though, you have to understand the difference between the outside stories and our inner stories. Outside stories are stories that we tell other people that sound socially acceptable. These are the stories that if we told someone, they would get. These are typically our filtered stories that have been through our analysis or have been set up by a diagnosis, either from someone else or from yourself. For example, an outside story might be, I'm depressed. In order to get to the inside stories though, you have to understand what that outside story means, right? For a lot of the triggers, fears, hesitations, and self-critical talk, it's the outside stories that we're hearing and that we're sharing. This happened, so this. Okay, so you're depressed. What does that mean for you? How does that feel in your body? Do you respond? What are your thoughts that you're thinking? In other words, how do you know you're depressed when you're depressed? What are you saying to yourself? What are you feeling? Or with depression, what are you not feeling? Does it mean that you can't move? Does it mean that you don't want to move? Does it mean that you just want to crawl up into a ball and lie in bed all day? Does it mean that nothing makes you happy? I don't know what it is for you, but in order to understand what that outside story means, you have to ask yourself these questions to get to the inner story. The same thing could be said about anxiousness. Again, if you say, I'm anxious, that's an outside story. And again, the same types of questions. How do you know you're anxious when you're anxious? And in asking that question, what you're starting to see are the inner stories that undergird those outer stories, that hold up and support those outer stories. It's these inner stories that we need to get to if we're going to be able to change. Inner stories come back to what I described last week as the small variable theory of change, right? It's those inflection stories that say, I'm this inside, right? And if you can change that small variable, if you can change this small story, it can change how you feel, maybe depression or anxiousness quickly, right? Like if you can change those small variables and those inflection point stories, those all inner stories, then you have the power to change something big in your life quickly. Our inner stories, though, tend to be less logical. If we explain them to someone else, we feel a little weird when we do so. They're often emotional. They have an emotional backing, and we know logically if we say it, we're going to be like, but it's really not like that, right? That generally happens. And sometimes these inner stories are so intertwined, they feel so real to us that they feel more like facts, that they feel absolutely true to every person out there no matter what. And when that happens, we don't even recognize those stories. This is why sometimes doing the heart of the story exercise is hard for people, because they don't even know what story to begin with, because they don't even see a separation between fact and story. Sometimes those inner stories are things that we don't want to share with others because they seem so quote unquote ridiculous. In fact, another part might chime in at the same time that you're thinking that and saying, that's stupid, as soon as you get to that inner story. By doing so, this other part is trying to save you from any embarrassment by sharing this story. To continue with the example of this week of being scared with dogs, the inner story might say, I need to run away. I need to get away as fast as I can, because if I don't, I'm going to get hurt. That's your inner story when you're around dogs, maybe, right? Like, I'm just making this up. But if that's your inner story, then you might feel ridiculous when saying that to someone when they ask you, what are you scared of when you see this small little puffball of a dog passing by you? Because inside, you feel like, I need to run away. I need to get away from here, otherwise I'm going to get hurt. Even though you logically know that it's not going to happen, right? You're not going to be hurt from this dog. But if that's your inner story, then that's your inner truth. And that's the story that we need to get to. That's what we need to see, understand, and be able to accept. And if we can't even get to that inner story, if you won't allow yourself to even understand what that inner story is telling you, even as it's telling you, then you're going to have a hard time changing that. This is the story that needs to be heard. It's the story that needs to be given a voice. These inner stories are our inflection point stories. These are the stories that have been stuck inside us. As I've said, anything that's ever caused a big emotional reaction within you still lives within you. And sometimes that's a good thing, right? Remembering your wedding day or the first time you had a kiss that really meant something to you, or your first date with someone that you love. All these situations are good things that get stuck within you. But sometimes certain things get stuck within you that you don't want to constantly feel every time you're in a certain situation. And those are the stories that get stuck, right? And the way to change that is by understanding what those inner stories are and then getting to the heart of that story. So if you can see, hear, understand, and accept what those stuck stories are, those inflection point stories, those inner stories for you, if you can do that and give that part of you the peace and change emotionally, then you have the ability to take that specific incident from the last time that you felt that and generalize it out to everything going forward. Before we get into the heart of the story exercise, there's 2 more things I need to share with you. In the next video, we'll talk about the next, which is all about you have different parts.